The missing key, why a palace guard had to break down the door to reach a crying Princess Charlotte. The morning sun streamed gently through the tall windows of the grand palace, painting golden patterns on the marble floors. Birds chirped softly outside, and the palace gardens were alive with the quiet hum of life. Inside, everything looked calm and perfect, as if nothing in the world could go wrong. But behind the polished walls, in the quiet corners of the palace, little Princess Charlotte was already beginning her day in a way that no one could predict. Charlotte was a small girl with bright eyes that seemed to notice everything. She had the curiosity of a cat, always peeking around corners and exploring the spaces where adults seldom went. Today, like many other mornings, she had woken early before the palace staff and wandered quietly through the hallways, her soft slippers making no sound on the cold marble. She loved the quiet hours before the palace came to life, when she could have the grand corridors all to herself. The palace was enormous. It had rooms so vast that a single corridor could stretch for what felt like miles. Chandeliers hung from the ceilings, glittering like captured stars, and each hallway was lined with portraits of ancestors who had ruled before her. These portraits, solemn and serious, watched over her as she passed, but Charlotte never felt intimidated. To her, they were companions, silent friends in her secret adventures. On this particular morning, she carried with her a small wooden box, polished and smooth, that she had received as a gift from her late grandmother. It was a special box, one that Charlotte treated with great care. Inside, she kept tiny treasures, feathers from the garden birds, little drawings she had made, and other small things she could not bear to lose. The box was so precious that she always locked it carefully, tucking the small key into the folds of her dress. But today, Charlotte had misplaced the key somewhere along her journey through the palace. As she wandered down the corridors, Charlotte imagined herself on a secret mission. She had created a little world in her mind, a palace within the palace, where she was the queen of her own tiny kingdom. She set up chairs as thrones, used silk curtains as royal banners, and whispered important commands to her invisible court. The thrill of her imagination made her forget time, and soon she realized that she wanted to spend some moments alone in her private chamber. The chamber she chose was a room tucked away on the top floor, a place few servants ever entered. Its windows overlooked the rose gardens, and the morning light made the walls glow with a soft pink hue. The room had a large bed with fluffy pillows, a small writing desk, and a closet filled with colorful dresses that Charlotte sometimes tried on, pretending she was attending grand balls. She loved this room because it felt like her own little world, separate from the palace duties, the staff, and the eyes of the adults who always watched her. Charlotte shut the door quietly behind her, and with a small sigh, she placed her treasure box on the writing desk. She wanted to open it, look at the treasures, and maybe add a few more she had collected that morning. She reached for the key but discovered it was not in her pocket. A frown appeared on her face, and she began to search the room frantically. Pillows were lifted, drawers pulled open, and the soft carpet was examined carefully. But the key was nowhere to be found. Frustrated, Charlotte thought about calling someone for help. She could have asked one of the palace maids or her nanny, but she decided against it. She wanted to handle this small problem on her own, like a real princess. So, with determination, she tried to unlock the box using other methods, but nothing worked. Tears began to well up in her eyes, not just from the frustration, but also from the sudden realization that she might never be able to open the box again without the key. The box had always been a secret, her private world, and the thought of it being closed forever made her heart ache. Outside the chamber, life in the palace continued as usual. The staff moved about, preparing breakfast, cleaning the floors, and polishing the chandeliers. Thomas, one of the palace guards, was performing his usual morning rounds. He was a tall, strong man with a kind face, known for his dedication and loyalty. He had watched over Princess Charlotte for years, understanding her moods and her quirks better than anyone else. He knew when she was happy, when she was upset, and even when she needed to be left alone. This morning, however, he noticed something unusual. As he walked past the hallway near Charlotte's chamber, he heard a soft sniffle. At first, he thought it might be the wind playing tricks, or perhaps one of the maids sneezing in the distance. But the sniffle came again, followed by the unmistakable sound of quiet crying. Thomas's trained instincts kicked in immediately. He knew that children, even royal ones, could get into trouble quickly, and that crying in the palace was rarely just a small thing. He stopped in front of Charlotte's door and knocked lightly. "Princess Charlotte, are you all right?" he called. There was no answer, only the continued sound of soft sobs. Thomas frowned. He knocked again, a little more firmly this time. "Charlotte, it's Thomas. Open the door for me." Still, there was no answer. The crying continued, growing a little louder, more desperate. Thomas's concern deepened. He could hear the small voice, frightened and alone, and he knew he had to act carefully but quickly. Inside the chamber, Charlotte was growing more anxious. The box sat locked on the desk, and she had tried everything she could think of to open it. She had even thought about breaking it, but that idea scared her. She did not want to ruin the beautiful box her grandmother had given her. Her tears flowed freely now, and her small body shook with emotion. She had never felt this kind of panic before, and the sound of someone knocking on the door startled her even more. Thomas tried speaking again, his voice calm and reassuring. "Charlotte, I'm right outside. I'm not here to punish you. I just need to make sure you're safe." The princess paused, hearing the warmth and care in his voice. She wanted to answer, but she felt embarrassed. She had locked herself in, lost the key, and had no idea what would happen next. Her pride and fear kept her silent. Meanwhile, Thomas stepped back and considered his options. He knew he could not just leave Charlotte alone, crying and locked inside her room. Something had to be done, but he also wanted to respect her privacy and her independence. He took a deep breath and decided to try the door handle carefully. It did not turn. He tried again, gently rocking the door back and forth. The door was securely locked. He frowned, realizing that this would require more than just gentle knocking and polite requests. Back inside, Charlotte curled up on the floor near her treasure box, hugging her knees. She felt a strange mix of fear and regret. She had wanted a few moments alone, and now it seemed those moments had caused trouble for everyone. She sniffled again, wishing she had been a little less stubborn, a little more careful. Her small fingers clutched the box, as if holding on tightly to her treasures could somehow make everything right again. Outside, Thomas's concern grew. He called softly again, "Charlotte, it's okay. I'm going to help you. You'll be safe in just a moment." His voice was steady, but the worry in his eyes was clear. He knew he had to act soon. Children could get frightened quickly, and even a small incident like this could become dangerous if it went on too long. He straightened his back, determined to handle the situation with both care and efficiency. And so, the palace, which had seemed so calm and perfect that morning, was quietly preparing for an event that would test patience, courage, and understanding. Behind the polished doors, Princess Charlotte cried softly, clutching her small treasure box, unaware that help was already on its way. And outside, Thomas, the loyal palace guard, prepared to do whatever it took to make sure the young princess would be safe, cared for, and reassured. The morning sun continued to climb higher, but in the quiet top-floor chamber, time seemed to stand still. A small key had gone missing, a little box remained locked, and a brave guard readied himself to act, setting the stage for an event that no one in the palace would ever forget. The sound of soft sobbing continued behind the closed chamber door, growing more desperate with each passing minute. Outside, Thomas, the palace guard, knew he had to act carefully. Every second mattered when a young child was upset and alone, and he could not afford to waste time. He knelt down slightly, placing his hand on the polished wooden door, trying to calm himself and think through the situation. "Charlotte," he called softly again. "I need you to stay calm. I'm here to help you, and you will be safe in just a moment. Can you hear me?" There was a pause, then a small sniffle. Charlotte's voice trembled as she whispered, I can't. The box, the key." Thomas's heart tightened. He understood immediately that this was not just about a missing key. For Charlotte, that little box meant more than anyone could understand. It held her treasures, her secrets, and her memories. To her, it was priceless, and the thought of it being locked away forever was unbearable. He took a deep breath. "I understand, Charlotte. I know how important your box is, but right now I need to make sure you are safe. That is the most important thing. Everything else can wait." Charlotte curled tighter on the floor, hugging herself. I wanted to be alone. I didn't mean to cause trouble." Thomas could hear the guilt in her small voice. It was the kind of guilt only children carried when their curiosity or small mistakes led to bigger problems. He understood completely. He had spent years observing Princess Charlotte, knowing that her mind worked differently from others her age. She saw the world with imagination and wonder, but sometimes that same curiosity got her into tricky situations. Outside, the palace staff had begun to notice the unusual quietness in the top-floor corridor. The cooks paused in their tasks, realizing that breakfast preparations were running late. The maids glanced at each other nervously, whispering that something must be wrong. They knew Thomas was in the hallway and they trusted him completely. He had always been calm, careful, and thoughtful, able to handle any situation without panic. Thomas stood up straight, running a hand through his hair. He thought about the door in front of him. It was a heavy oak door built to be secure and strong, but right now it was keeping a frightened little girl trapped inside. He knocked once more, hoping that hearing his voice and the sound of someone outside would calm Charlotte a little. "I'm not leaving," he said gently. "I promise, I'm right here and I'm going to make sure you're okay. Just take a deep breath and try to stay calm." Inside the room, Charlotte sniffled and wiped her tears with the sleeve of her dress. She wanted to respond, to tell him she was all right, but the fear and frustration kept her silent. The box sat on the desk, still locked, and she felt as though she had made a terrible mistake. Her imagination, which usually brought her joy, now felt like a trap. The walls of the chamber seemed taller, the ceiling higher, and the door an insurmountable barrier between her and the outside world. Thomas paused for a moment, thinking carefully about his next step. He did not want to frighten Charlotte further, but he also knew that waiting any longer could make her panic worse. Children could become frightened very quickly, and sometimes that fear could turn into something more serious if not addressed immediately. He considered calling for help, but he realized that adding more voices and commotion might only make her cry harder. He had to act alone with calmness and patience. He reached for the door handle again, trying carefully to turn it. It did not budge. He tried gently rocking the door back and forth, listening for any sound from Charlotte that might indicate she was frightened or in danger. Her sobs were still there, soft but steady, a reminder that she needed him to act soon. As he worked, Thomas's mind wandered briefly to the times he had watched over Charlotte before. She had a habit of disappearing for short moments, sneaking into rooms she was not supposed to enter. Sometimes it had led to small messes or minor accidents, but he had always been there to protect her, ready to step in before anything serious happened. Today, however, felt different. The stakes were higher, and the worry in his chest grew heavier with every passing second. He thought of her small voice, trembling and unsure. He thought of the tiny hands clutching a box that meant so much. He thought of the responsibility he carried as a guard, not just to the palace, but to Charlotte herself. And then he decided that he would not wait any longer. He had to find a way to open the door and get to her safely. Thomas knelt down again, examining the lock closely. It was a traditional key lock, one that had been designed to be strong and secure. He realized that without the key, it could take time to open it. He considered calling the palace locksmith, but then he remembered how fragile Charlotte seemed, how the soft sobs behind the door indicated her rising distress. Waiting for anyone else could make her fear worse. He had to act immediately. At that moment, a small voice whispered from inside the room, breaking his thoughts. I don't want anyone to be mad at me." Charlotte's words were quiet, but Thomas heard them clearly. He smiled softly, speaking through the door. "No one is mad at you, Charlotte. You are safe, and that is all that matters right now. We just need to get you out of there, okay?" There was another pause, then a sniffle, and he knew she had listened. He could sense her trust, fragile but present, as he prepared for the next step. With gentle hands, he positioned himself at the door, ready to try one more time. The palace staff outside the corridor watched quietly, sensing the tension but trusting Thomas completely. They had seen him handle emergencies before, and they knew that if anyone could manage this delicate situation, it was him. They stayed a safe distance away, giving him space while remaining ready to assist if needed. Thomas tried to turn the handle once more. It did not move. He could hear Charlotte's soft cries growing slightly louder, and he realized that waiting any longer might make her panic more. He spoke calmly through the door. "Charlotte, I'm going to get you out now. I need you to stay as calm as you can. I promise you will be safe." Her small voice whispered back, shaky but trusting. "Okay." That simple response was enough to give Thomas the confidence he needed. He took a deep breath, bracing himself. He would have to force the door open carefully, using strength but also great caution to avoid hurting anyone or alarming Charlotte unnecessarily. His hands gripped the frame, and with a careful push, he began to test the door, rocking it gently but firmly. Inside, Charlotte felt a strange sense of hope as the door moved slightly. She was still frightened, but she knew that Thomas was there, and somehow that knowledge calmed her. The thought of being alone and trapped was terrifying, but the realization that someone she trusted was acting to help her brought a small measure of relief. Outside, the effort grew. Thomas focused all his attention, adjusting his grip, positioning his body carefully. He knew this moment required balance, strength without force, care without hesitation. Every muscle in his body was alert, ready to respond to any sudden movement from Charlotte or the door. Finally, with a small click and a gentle push, the door gave way slightly. Thomas held it steady, speaking softly through the gap. "Charlotte, I've got it open. You're going to be safe now. Just a little more." Inside the room, Charlotte's eyes widened as she saw a sliver of light from the hallway. Relief washed over her, mixed with the lingering fear of the past few minutes. She took a small step back, unsure what to do, but listening intently to Thomas's calm voice. The moment was tense, quiet, and full of anticipation. Outside, the palace staff watched, holding their breath. Inside, Charlotte prepared herself, still clutching the little box that had caused all this trouble. And Thomas, steady and patient, prepared to step in, ready to reassure, protect, and finally bring her safely out of the locked room. The door finally creaked open just enough for Thomas to slip through. His strong hands moved carefully to hold it steady, making sure it did not slam against the frame. The small room, filled with soft pink light from the morning sun, now felt even more delicate, as if the air itself were holding its breath. Princess Charlotte sat on the floor, hugging her knees, her eyes wide and shining with tears. For a moment, she did not move, staring at Thomas as if unsure whether to trust that someone had finally arrived to help her. Thomas knelt down, lowering himself to her level so that he would not appear threatening. "Charlotte, it's all right," he said softly. "I've got you now, you're safe, I'm right here with you." Charlotte sniffled, her small hands tightening around the treasured box. I didn't mean to, I wanted to play by myself," she whispered, her voice shaking. Her tears flowed freely now, the fear and frustration of being trapped mixing with guilt. Thomas smiled gently, carefully placing a hand on her shoulder. "I know, Charlotte. You didn't do anything wrong. You were just trying to have some time alone. That's okay. But sometimes, even when we try to do things by ourselves, we need a little help. And that's why I'm here." For the first time, Charlotte's sobs began to soften. She could feel the calm in Thomas's voice, the warmth in his presence. He had always been a protector, but now she realized just how much he cared about her. He wasn't just a guard who followed rules, he was someone she could trust completely. Thomas reached for the small box on the desk. "Is this the box you've been trying to open?" he asked gently. Charlotte nodded, her small lips trembling. "Yes, it's mine. It has everything important to me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas looked at the little box with respect. He could see why it mattered so much to her. It wasn't just a box, it was her memories, her little treasures, the pieces of her world that made her feel happy and secure. He carefully picked it up and held it in his hands. "I understand, Charlotte, and I promise we'll make sure it's safe. But first, let's get you out of here, okay?" Charlotte hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. She trusted Thomas, but the world outside still seemed overwhelming after the few minutes she had spent locked inside. Thomas gently took her hand, and she allowed him to help her to her feet. She clutched her box tightly, like holding onto her courage itself. As they stepped out of the chamber, the palace staff let out quiet sighs of relief. Thomas held the door open, making sure Charlotte was safe before allowing anyone else to enter the hallway. She walked slowly, still holding onto Thomas's hand, while he kept one hand gently on her back, guiding her carefully. The palace corridor, which had seemed so ordinary before, now felt different to Charlotte. It had been a place of fear and frustration, but it was also the place where help had arrived. She glanced around at the tall walls, the portraits of past monarchs, and even the glittering chandeliers above. And for the first time, she noticed them not as imposing, but as silent witnesses to her small adventure. Thomas led her to a comfortable chair near the window, where the morning sunlight made the flowers outside glow with life. "Sit here for a moment," he said softly. "Let's take a few deep breaths. Everything is okay now." Charlotte sat down, still holding the little box tightly in her lap. Her tears began to dry, replaced by a mixture of relief and lingering fear. She looked up at Thomas, her eyes wide. Did I make everyone upset?" she asked, her voice small. Thomas shook his head gently. "No, Charlotte, you didn't make anyone upset. Everyone was just worried because they care about you. That's all. You see, sometimes people get worried when they love someone. That's what happened here. Everyone was just making sure you were safe." Charlotte thought about this for a moment. She had never realized how much people cared for her. She had always known that Thomas watched over her, but the thought that everyone in the palace was concerned made her feel both important and a little embarrassed. She smiled softly, feeling the weight of fear lift from her small shoulders. "I'm sorry," she said finally, looking down at her hands. "I didn't mean to cause so much trouble." Thomas crouched down again, gently tilting her chin up so that she would look at him. "Charlotte, there's no need to apologize. You were just a little scared and frustrated. That happens to everyone. What matters is that you are safe now, and we can make sure nothing like this happens again." Charlotte nodded slowly, feeling reassured. She looked at her little box and then back at Thomas. Can I keep it safe now?" she asked. Thomas smiled. "Of course, we'll keep it safe together, and I'll help you keep track of the key too so it never goes missing again." The princess felt a wave of relief wash over her. It wasn't just the box she was worried about anymore. It was the sense of being cared for, of knowing that she wasn't alone. She realized that asking for help didn't make her weak. It made her strong in a different way. As they sat together, Thomas told her a small story about the palace's past, about the way guards and caretakers had always looked after the royal family. He spoke softly, letting Charlotte feel that she was part of a long history of protection and care. She listened intently, forgetting for a moment about her missing key, her tears replaced by curiosity and wonder. The palace staff, seeing Charlotte calm down, began to return to their normal duties. They exchanged quiet smiles, grateful that Thomas had handled the situation so well. They knew the princess had been frightened, but now, thanks to his patience and bravery, she was safe and comforted. Charlotte, feeling more at ease, opened the little box carefully. She looked at her treasures, tiny feathers, drawings, and small trinkets, and smiled. Everything was just as she had left it. The box was safe, and so was she. The fear that had gripped her moments ago began to fade completely, replaced by a sense of gratitude and trust. Thomas watched her quietly, a small smile on his face. He felt a sense of pride and relief. His job was not just to guard the palace, but to protect the people inside it, especially the young princess who trusted him completely. He knew that today he had done what was necessary, and he had done it carefully with patience and love. Charlotte looked up at him again, her eyes bright and clear. "Thank you, Thomas," she said softly. I was really scared." Thomas nodded, his voice gentle but firm. "I know, Charlotte, and that's okay. It's normal to be scared sometimes. The important thing is that you didn't stay scared alone. You let someone help you, and that's very brave." Charlotte thought about this. She realized that being brave didn't always mean doing everything alone. Sometimes it meant trusting someone else to help, even when she felt small and afraid. She smiled at Thomas, feeling the warmth of his care and protection. For the rest of the morning, Charlotte stayed near the window, talking quietly with Thomas. She told him about her treasures, her drawings, and the stories she imagined for her little kingdom inside the palace. Thomas listened patiently, encouraging her, laughing softly at her creative ideas and sharing gentle advice when needed. By the time the sun had climbed high into the sky, Charlotte felt lighter, happier, and safe. The memory of being locked inside the room was still there, but it no longer felt frightening. Instead, it reminded her of the moment she had learned something important, that courage, trust, and care were sometimes more powerful than independence or stubbornness. And Thomas, watching over her, felt a quiet satisfaction. He had protected the princess, calmed her fears, and ensured that the little treasures she loved so dearly were safe. Today had been challenging, but it had also strengthened the bond between the young princess and the guard who had always watched over her. As they finally stood to return to the main halls of the palace, Charlotte clutched her box and looked up at Thomas. Can we go see everyone now?" she asked, her voice full of hope. Thomas nodded. "Yes, Charlotte, everyone will be glad to see you safe and smiling. Let's go together." The two of them walked slowly down the corridor, the morning sunlight illuminating the path ahead. For Charlotte, the hallway no longer seemed intimidating. It was a place of safety, care, and trust. And for Thomas, every step reminded him of the importance of his duty, not just as a guard, but as a protector of hearts, hopes, and small treasures that meant the world to a little princess. After the tense morning had passed, Charlotte sat quietly on a small chair near the window, her treasured box safely on her lap. The sunlight streamed through the curtains, falling gently on her face, and for the first time since the incident, she felt calm. Thomas stayed by her side, his presence steady and comforting, as she took a few deep breaths and began to process everything that had happened. Charlotte looked down at her small box. She had tried so hard to be independent, to handle things on her own, but the fear she had felt in that locked room reminded her that even princesses sometimes needed help. She hugged the box tightly, realizing that it wasn't just about the key, it was about her safety and the people who cared for her. Thomas knelt beside her, speaking softly. "Charlotte, I think we should figure out how this happened. Do you remember where you had the key last?" Charlotte's face scrunched up in thought. She remembered putting the key in the pocket of her dress the night before, after locking the box carefully. She had been proud of herself for being responsible, but now she realized she must have dropped it somewhere along the way. I think I had it when I was walking in the hall," she said hesitantly. "Maybe it fell somewhere," Thomas nodded. "That makes sense. Keys can be tricky. Sometimes they fall or get misplaced. What matters now is that you're safe and your box is safe." Charlotte smiled faintly. "I guess I should have asked for help sooner," she admitted, her small voice full of honesty. "I didn't want anyone to think I was doing something wrong." Thomas placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Charlotte, asking for help is never wrong. It shows courage, not weakness. Today, you learned that even when things seem scary, there are people who care about you and are ready to help. That's something very important to remember." As they spoke, the palace staff slowly gathered outside the chamber. The maids and cooks watched quietly, giving Charlotte space, but they were eager to see that she was all right. The senior staff member, Lady Alina, approached gently, smiling at the princess. "Charlotte, we're all so glad you're safe," she said kindly. "We were very worried when we couldn't hear from you." Charlotte looked up at her, still holding the box. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I didn't mean to make everyone worried. I wanted to be alone with my treasures." Lady Alina nodded, understanding in her eyes. "We know, dear, it's okay to want time for yourself. But sometimes, even when we're careful, things happen. Today, you learned something important. It's always okay to ask for help when you need it." Thomas stood quietly behind Charlotte, watching her carefully. He had been in the palace for many years, and he knew that young children often struggled with balancing independence and safety. Charlotte had always been imaginative and clever, but today's incident had shown how easily small mistakes could create fear and stress. It was a lesson not just for her, but for everyone who cared for her. Charlotte thought about her little box. She had been so focused on keeping it safe that she had forgotten about herself. She realized that worrying about the box while being trapped in the room had been overwhelming. Now, with Thomas and the staff by her side, she felt a sense of relief and understanding. She knew that treasures and objects were important, but safety and trust were even more valuable. Lady Alina continued softly, "Charlotte, we also need to make sure something like this doesn't happen again. We can create a system so that the keys to your treasures are always accounted for. That way, you can enjoy your time alone safely, and we won't have to worry." Charlotte nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, please, that sounds like a good idea. I don't want anyone to be scared again, and I don't want to be scared either." Thomas smiled, impressed by her thoughtfulness. "That's a wonderful idea, Charlotte. It shows that you've learned from today and are thinking about everyone, not just yourself. That's very mature." The staff began to organize a small plan. Lady Alina suggested a special pouch that Charlotte could wear, which would hold the key safely at all times. Another staff member recommended a gentle bell that would signal if the key was misplaced, ensuring that no one panicked again. Charlotte listened carefully, excited at the idea that her treasures could be safe while she also felt secure. As the conversation continued, Charlotte began to relax more fully. She realized that the people around her cared deeply and wanted to help, not control her. That was a comforting thought, one that made her smile genuinely for the first time that morning. Thomas stood beside her, feeling proud that he had been able to guide her through this frightening experience with patience and calmness. Charlotte opened the box carefully, examining her treasures once more. Each tiny feather, each small drawing, each little trinket seemed more precious than ever. She realized that today had given her something even more valuable than the contents of the box. the knowledge that she could trust others, and that asking for help didn't make her weak. "I promise," Charlotte said softly to Thomas, "I'll be more careful from now on and I'll ask for help when I need it. I don't want anyone to be scared again, and I don't want to be scared either." Thomas placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "That's a wonderful promise, Charlotte, and remember, you don't have to wait until something is scary to ask for help. You can always talk to someone even when things seem small. That's what keeps everyone safe and happy." Charlotte nodded, feeling a warmth in her chest. She looked at her little box and then at Thomas and the staff around her. She realized that while the treasures inside were important, the people who cared for her were far more precious. Their guidance, patience, and care were what made her feel truly secure. The palace slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Breakfast was prepared, the hallways cleaned, and the morning sunlight filled every corridor. Charlotte sat with Thomas and Lady Elena, talking quietly about the lessons she had learned. She felt more grown-up, more aware of her surroundings, and more grateful for the people who looked after her. For Thomas, this day had been a reminder of why he had chosen this job. Guarding the palace was more than keeping doors locked or walking the corridors. It was about protecting lives, hearts, and the trust that came with responsibility. Charlotte had shown courage in her own way, and he had guided her with patience and care. Together, they had turned a frightening situation into a learning experience, one that would strengthen their bond forever. Charlotte's small box rested safely on the desk, now secure in its place. She looked around the room and smiled, realizing that her world was bigger than she had thought. It included not just her treasures, but the people who loved and cared for her. She had been reminded that even in moments of fear and frustration, trust and guidance could turn things around. Lady Elena smiled at Charlotte. "You've done very well today, dear. You handled your fear and you listened carefully. That shows great courage and wisdom." Charlotte blushed slightly, feeling proud. She looked at Thomas, who nodded encouragingly. "I'm proud of you too, Charlotte," he said. "You stayed strong even when things were scary. That's what makes someone truly brave." The young princess felt a glow of happiness. She had learned that bravery wasn't just about doing things alone. It was also about trusting others and making smart choices. She had been scared, she had cried, and she had learned, but she had also been supported, and that made all the difference. By mid-morning, Charlotte was calm and cheerful again. She walked through the corridors with Thomas by her side, holding her little box securely. The staff smiled as they saw her laughing softly at a small joke Thomas made. The tension of the morning had faded completely, replaced by warmth, trust, and understanding. Charlotte realized that today's incident would always be a memory she carried with her. It was a story of fear, care, trust, and learning. It was a story that reminded her of the people who looked after her, and the lessons that even small events could teach. And most importantly, it was a story that showed her that courage came in many forms, not just in facing challenges alone, but in trusting the people who loved you. The rest of the morning passed quietly, with Princess Charlotte feeling lighter than she had in hours. Her little box sat safely on the desk, each tiny treasure inside untouched and secure. She felt a strange mix of relief and pride. Relief because she had been rescued and comforted, and pride because she had learned something important about trust, courage, and asking for help. Thomas remained at her side, calm and watchful, making sure she did not feel afraid again. Soon, footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Charlotte looked up and saw her family approaching. Her mother, the queen, and her father, the king, entered the room with expressions of worry that quickly turned into relief when they saw her safe. The queen's eyes glistened with tears as she rushed forward to hug her daughter gently, wrapping her arms around Charlotte in a warm embrace. "Oh, my sweet Charlotte," the queen said softly, holding her tightly. "We were so worried about you. Are you all right, my love?" Charlotte hugged her back, feeling the familiar comfort of her mother's presence. "I'm okay now, Mama," she said softly. "Thomas helped me and I'm safe." The king approached as well, smiling gently at his daughter. "I'm glad to see you safe, Charlotte," he said, kneeling slightly to meet her eyes. "It must have been frightening to be stuck in your room, but I hear you handled it bravely with help from those who care for you." Charlotte nodded. "I was scared, Papa. But Thomas stayed calm and helped me. He explained everything and made me feel safe. I learned that it's okay to ask for help, even if I wanted to do things alone." The queen smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Charlotte's face. "That is very wise, my darling. You see, courage isn't only about doing things on your own. It's also about trusting the people who care for you to help when you need it. Today, you showed both bravery and wisdom." Charlotte blushed slightly, feeling proud. She looked toward Thomas, who stood quietly nearby, observing the family reunion with quiet satisfaction. He had always been loyal and protective, but moments like these reminded him why his work mattered so much. He was not just a guard of the palace, but a protector of hearts, trust, and safety. "Thank you, Thomas," Charlotte said softly, looking up at him. "I know I can always trust you now. You helped me when I was scared, and I will never forget that." Thomas smiled gently, bowing his head slightly. "It's my duty and my honor, Princess Charlotte. I will always be here to make sure you are safe, no matter what." The Queen looked at Thomas with gratitude. "Thank you for acting so quickly and carefully. You kept Charlotte safe and reassured her, and that is more important than anything else. Your courage and wisdom made all the difference this morning." Thomas nodded respectfully. "It was my responsibility, Your Majesty. I am glad she is safe." Charlotte turned her attention back to her little box, carefully opening it to look at her treasures once more. Each tiny feather, drawing, and trinket seemed more precious than ever. She realized that the small objects she loved were important, but the people who cared for her, the ones who helped, protected, and guided her, were far more valuable. "Papa, Mama," she said, her voice thoughtful, "I think I understand something now. My treasures are special, yes, but the people who care about me, they are even more important. They keep me safe and make sure I don't get hurt." The king nodded proudly. "That is very true, Charlotte, and today you learned that courage and wisdom come in many forms. Trusting others is just as important as handling things on your own. You've grown a little wiser today, my daughter." Charlotte smiled, feeling warmth in her chest. She realized that today's frightening morning had given her a gift far greater than the contents of her box. The knowledge that she could trust, ask for help, and rely on the people who loved her without fear. Thomas gently guided Charlotte to the main hall, where the rest of the palace staff had gathered. Everyone smiled warmly as she appeared, safe and cheerful once again. The maids, cooks, and other attendants exchanged quiet glances of relief, happy to see the princess unharmed and calm. Charlotte waved softly at them, her smile bright, showing that she was no longer afraid. Lady Alina stepped forward, speaking kindly. "Charlotte, you handled a difficult situation very well. You trusted the people around you and you listened. That is something to be proud of." Charlotte looked at her and nodded. "I am proud too, and I promise to always ask for help when I need it. I don't want anyone to be worried again, and I don't want to be scared either." The Queen and King shared a glance, pleased with how Charlotte had learned from the morning's events. They knew that growing up in the palace came with challenges, and today their daughter had faced one of them bravely and thoughtfully. Thomas, watching quietly, felt a deep sense of fulfillment. His job was more than following rules or patrolling the halls. It was about protecting those who could not always protect themselves and helping them feel safe and understood. Today, he had done just that, and seeing Charlotte's bright, calm smile filled him with quiet pride. Charlotte's thoughts drifted to the little box in her hands. She had feared it would be lost, broken, or forgotten during the morning's incident. But now, after being safe and comforted, she realized that the box was a reminder of her own courage, her ability to learn, and the care of those who loved her. She smiled at Thomas, who nodded encouragingly, and then turned to her parents. "Mama, Papa," she said softly, "I think this morning taught me something very important. It's not only about treasures or keys or rooms, it's about people. The people who love you, they are the most precious things of all." The Queen and King nodded, feeling a warmth of pride and joy. "Very wise words, Charlotte," the Queen said. "You have learned a lesson that will stay with you forever. Courage, trust, and care, these are treasures that no one can take away." Charlotte clutched her box gently, then looked up at Thomas. "Thank you again," she said. "I know I can always count on you. You helped me when I needed it the most." Thomas bowed slightly, a small smile on his face. "Always, Princess Charlotte, you will always be safe with me." The rest of the morning passed in calm and gentle conversation. Charlotte shared stories about her treasures, the little things she had collected, and her small adventures in the palace halls. The staff listened patiently, laughing softly at her imaginative tales and admiring her creativity. Charlotte felt more confident, more secure, and more connected to the people around her. By noon, the palace had returned to its usual rhythm, but Charlotte felt changed. The fear she had experienced in the morning was now a memory that reminded her of trust, courage, and the importance of asking for help. She knew that mistakes could happen, that things could go wrong, but she also knew that there were people ready to protect her, guide her, and care for her when she needed it most. Thomas remained nearby, keeping a watchful eye while also giving Charlotte the freedom to explore and enjoy her day. He had learned something as well. That protection was not just about preventing accidents, but about teaching understanding, patience, and confidence to the young ones in his care. Charlotte carefully placed her little box back on the desk, smiling as she looked at it. The morning had been frightening, yes, but it had also been a lesson, a moment of growth, and a story she would remember forever. She realized that courage was not always about facing challenges alone. It was also about trusting, learning, and being brave in asking for help. The palace, once filled with tension and worry, now felt peaceful. The staff returned to their duties, the sunlight filled every corridor, and Charlotte walked beside Thomas and her parents, feeling safe, loved, and understood. Today had been an important day, a day of lessons and love, and she would carry its memories always. As the afternoon sun warmed the palace gardens outside, Charlotte paused and looked at Thomas. "I'm glad you were here this morning," she said softly. "I think I've learned a lot. About bravery, about trust, and about the people who care for me." Thomas smiled, his eyes gentle. "And I'm proud of you, Charlotte. You faced your fear, learned from it, and trusted those who care for you. That is true courage." Charlotte hugged her box and then her parents, feeling a sense of happiness she had not known in hours. The little incident with the missing key, which had seemed so frightening in the moment, had turned into a story of trust, learning, and love. She had faced fear, accepted help, and learned valuable lessons about safety, courage, and the people around her. The day ended quietly, with Charlotte safe in her chamber, the box secure on the desk, and Thomas watching over her with calm, steady eyes. The palace was peaceful once more, but the memory of the morning would stay with everyone who had been involved. The young princess, the loyal guard, and the caring staff. It was a story of courage, trust, and the importance of caring for one another, a lesson that would never be forgotten. Charlotte finally lay down on her bed, the sunlight fading as the afternoon gave way to evening. She hugged her little box one last time, whispering softly, "Thank you, everyone." She felt safe, loved, and understood, knowing that no matter what happened, there were people she could trust, people who cared for her, and a little courage inside her that had grown stronger. Today,